Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the International Economic Forum of the Americas for inviting me to take part in this year's Conference of Montreal, one of my absolute favorite cities in the world. Of course, when you hear this, I'll be on an official visit to Paraguay, one of my favorite countries in the world, which precludes my being there in person. However, it's an honor to share my perspective and the perspective of the Inter-American Development Bank. Right now, Latin America and the Caribbean faces the daunting task of recovering from the worst socioeconomic crisis in its modern history. That's a fact. With just 8% of the world's population, we have mourned nearly a third of total deaths, an irreplaceable loss of more than 1.5 million people. Today, only 1 in 4 people has been fully immunized, and while vaccine availability and access have improved, they remain far short of where they need to be. Beyond the public health crisis, COVID-19's terrible reach has found nearly every corner of our societies. As many as 50 million people dropped out of the middle class last year, worsening on already historic inequality. In terms of that extraordinary decline, in terms of students missing out on education, in terms of women's participation in the workforce, the pandemic has exposed our region's institutional weaknesses and undone as much as a decade of hard-won gains. Looming in the background is another unprecedented challenge: climate change. Like the pandemic, this is a challenge that knows no borders. And like the pandemic, it can destroy lives and livelihoods. But unlike the pandemic, there's no vaccine. Rather, addressing this threat is a matter of priorities, of commitment, of bold mitigation and adaptation investments that we simply must make. Our region is one of the world's most susceptible to the effect of climate change, including natural disasters that are exacerbated by it, as we saw last fall with hurricanes Eta and Iota. Unless global warming is limited to less than 2 degrees Celsius, our region will suffer damage from climate impacts that could reach $100 billion a year by 2050, threatening development gains well after recovery from the pandemic. However, potential does exist for breakthroughs, and alongside the strategic and policy-based changes that I'll get to shortly, a key to achieving them is simply a change of our mindset. As we head into COP26, now is once and for all the time to dispel the myth that action on climate change is incompatible with economic growth. That is simply not true. In fact, we estimate that the path toward decarbonization could create 15 million net new jobs in Latin America and the Caribbean by 2030 in areas such as plant-based food production, renewable energy, and construction. Peru, for example. We estimate that achieving carbon neutrality could yield $140 billion in net benefits by 2050 through transformations in sectors such as transformation, energy, land use change, forestry, waste, industrial processes, far exceeding the investments required to enable the transition. It's a no-brainer. When I came to the IDB, now just shy of a year ago, we immediately began working on a blueprint for accelerating recovery in our 26 borrowing member countries and fostering more sustainable, more inclusive economic growth. We call it Vision 2025. It's our plan for boldly reinvesting in the Americas to help flip another potentially quote-unquote lost decade into one of opportunity, of prosperity, and of resilience. It identifies 5 areas of focus for the IDB that can have the greatest power to help set the region on this path. What are they? Regional integration and strengthened value chains, digitalization, support for small and medium-sized businesses, gender equality, and robust and determined action on climate change. These areas, of course, are all interlinked as well, and together they have the potential to power a recovery that is green. So the big question is, how can we pursue progress in all of those areas most effectively to arrive at that desired sustainable outcome? And relatedly, how can we ensure that the transition into a greener economy is just and doesn't leave anyone behind when industries are transformed? But also, how can we attract much needed private capital for these investments? Let's start with public policy. Applying lessons learned from past crises, we need to design new stimulus packages and green investment agendas. And here's some aspects that we need to keep foremost in our minds. Policies must be coordinated and aligned with decarbonization frameworks that could take their basis from the nationally determined contributions to comply with the Paris Agreement. On the issue of job creation, it's important to synchronize the generation of green jobs. Employees must first be trained and their skills developed in renewable energy construction operation before financing is made available for these projects. And it's also a good opportunity to retrain employees who are currently working in carbon-intensive sectors. So it doesn't make sense to give incentives to clean energy, particularly if governments continue to direct part of the public resources to fossil fuel subsidies. Stimulus packages are a good opportunity to innovate and accelerate the learning curve of new technologies, and in many cases to generate a value change, which is what we see. And the transition needs to focus on social inclusion. The COVID-19 crisis had the worst effect on young, lower income, low-skilled workers and minorities. So it's essential to design and implement measures that specifically support those most vulnerable populations. Additionally, government should not overlook the power that they hold in bringing the private sector to the table. Let's bring them to the table on this issue. According to the International Energy Agency, more than 70% of energy infrastructure investments worldwide are motivated or driven by governments. Clearly, the role of public leaders is going to be critical in creating a stable and enabling environment for the private investors, for the private sector, those who at the end of the day will bridge the enormous financing gaps between where we are now and the sustainable future that we need to build. The IDB has been the trusted partner of Latin America and the Caribbean for more than 6 decades, and over the course of many varied and profound transitions as we're facing now. We are determined to maximize our impact in the face of this existential challenge. We will continue to play a critical role in mitigating the risk of adopting new renewable technologies, of providing additional security to both government and stakeholders from the finance community. And this work includes involvement at an early stage in the identification of projects and their design, as well as the social environmental safeguards and the close partnerships with executing agencies and beneficiaries during the construction and operational phases. The IDB also supports efforts to create good institutional regulatory frameworks that provide confidence and long-term stability to investors. Let me just offer 2 examples from two very different countries in our region. We're currently working with local utilities and the local development banks in Colombia to provide guarantees, recourse debt, and other financial instruments to energy markets. We also continue to provide recommendations from energy sector reform, including guidance on new technologies that need to be incentivized to leverage the energy transition. This holistic, phased-based approach to energy transition helped Colombia increase its proportion of solar and wind energy from less than 1% to 12% in less than 4 years. In the Bahamas, where current hurricanes devastated the power infrastructure, we have provided the energy regulator with best practices for setting tariffs on distributed solar energy. On the investment side, we're working with the Ministry of Finance of the Bahamas to set up a renewable energy finance facility that will promote local ownership and deploy innovative microgrids that could help the island become more resilient to climate change and also reach a renewable energy target of 30% by 2030. And speaking of technology, one key that will boost our decarbonization efforts in the region is electric mobility. In parallel to the emission savings, efficiency gains from the use of electric vehicles and car sharing services can increase the income of poor households in Latin America and the Caribbean by an average of almost 2% over 10 years. It's a no-brainer. In this area of sustainable transport, the IDB has provided technical assistance in policy, strategy, and regulation to more than 15 countries in our region. For example, we approved lines of credits to facilitate access to electric mobility in Peru and Ecuador, mobilizing resources from climate funds. And just a few days ago, in fact, we signed a letter of intent with AFD, the French development agency, to strengthen our cooperation on the development of particularly electric mobility and other climate change mitigation efforts in the Americas. By the way, electric mobility also presents a great opportunity for the region's lithium industry, a crucial element for the batteries in electric vehicles. Think of this. Global demand for lithium is expected to skyrocket by almost 1,000%. Let me say 1,000% by 2050. Now, that's some demand. Argentina, Bolivia, Chile account for well over half of the world's supply of lithium. And now we found deposits of lithium in Brazil, Mexico, and Peru. A unique opportunity. Latin American companies must be inserted into the new lithium value chains that will emerge. As a matter of fact, no. They should be the center of the value chains for lithium, a key example of how our Vision 2025 priorities align and can be mutually reinforcing for sustainable development. The IDB will continue to support our borrowing members in facing what is at once an immense challenge, but a major opportunity in adapting and mitigating climate change while seeing to the needs of all society. We're going to strengthen their capacity to embrace technological change, improve their legal and regulatory frameworks to pave the way for private sector investment and promote climate resilient, inclusive development across sectors. At the same time, we're directly assisting the private sector to become the player that it can and must be in the area. From powering growth of what's the region's green bond market, where we have been key, to developing innovative financial tools, including blended finance and guarantees. And we're going to continue working shoulder to shoulder with you, your organizations, all stakeholders at the table in this critical juncture. We're going to find more complementarities, we're going to increase our collective ambition, and we're going to forge this climate progress together. Thank you.